All right. So just got cut off for a minute, but resuming. So we were talking about Lord Kapila was saying, they whose mind is attached to the world and who are full of reverence for religious rites, when they perform actions that are motivated by desire, but actions that are not prohibited by the scriptures. So their motive is selfish desire, but they're not hurting people. As well as of those which are of an obligatory nature in their entirety. So they fulfill their obligations, they chase after selfish desires, but they're not hurting people. With their understanding clouded by passion, their mind full of desires, and their senses uncontrolled, they worship the Pitris every day, their heart finding delight in the home alone. So this here means that they're attached to their ancestral line. They worship the Pitris, they worship their own ancestors. They're trying to carry on the family line, basically. And what their heart finds delight in is in their home and their clan and their bodily identity. Devoted to the first three objects of human pursuit only, dharma, artha, and kama, but no interest in moksha. These people are averse to the stories of Sri Hari Madhusudhana, whose knowledge takes away the fear of birth and death, and whose innumerable exploits are worth recounting. Abandoning the nectar-like stories of the immortal Lord, they who listen to vile talks, even as the swine feed on filth, have surely been cheated by fate. Performing religious rites, fate, of course, being made of the results of their own karmas. Performing religious rites from the ceremony connected with impregnation, that means the Garbhadhana Sanskara, the Vedic ritual of conceiving a child, down to the obsequies, the funeral rites of after death. So all the sanskaras throughout life. They ascend to the Pitriloka, the abode of the Pitris, presided over by Aryama. Aryama is a Vedic deva who is the lord of the Pitris. By the southern path, also known as the dark path, the Dakshinayana, it's called in Sanskrit. And they who were so attached to their own family line are born in the line of their own progeny. They will be reborn as their own bodily descendants in the same bloodline. Thereafter, when their merit is exhausted, they are forthwith robbed of their glorious state by the gods in charge of Pitriloka, and helplessly descend once more to this world, O virtuous lady. Therefore do you worship with all your being the Supreme Lord, whose lotus-like feet are worth adoring through devotion invoked by his virtues. A link formed through devotion with Lord Vasudeva calls forth before long dispassion and spiritual wisdom that reveals the truth of the absolute. When the mind of the devotee ceases to perceive, even through the faculty of the senses, any difference in terms of agreeability or otherwise in the objects of the senses, which are just the same, all being manifestations of Brahman. In other words, when you look at any two things and you don't prefer one over the other in a deep or absolute sense. He forthwith realizes by his intellect his own self as the revealer of unity, free from attachment, devoid of merit and demerit, and established in its own state. The Lord is nothing but absolute consciousness and is the same as the transcendent reality Brahman, the supreme spirit Paramatman, the ruler of all and the highest person. Though one, he appears in diverse forms as the seer, the object seen, the means of sight, and so on. Absence of attachment to all, that is the only desired end to be attained through all forms of yoga practiced by a yogi. Brahman is absolute consciousness, one and attributeless. Yet through the senses, which have an outward tendency, it erroneously appears in the form of various objects possessing sound and other attributes. Just as the same supreme Brahman appeared as Mahat Tattva, the threefold ego, the Sattvika, Rajasika, and Tamasika ego, the 5 gross elements and the 11 indriyas, and the same self-effulgent being was named as Jiva when endowed with these. Even so, the body of the Jiva in the form of the universe is no other than Brahman, for it is from Brahman that it has sprung. Of course, he alone can perceive it as such, whose mind has been composed and rid of all attachment through reverence, devotion, daily practice of yoga, and dispassion. I have thus expounded to you, O revered mother, the wisdom which reveals the true nature of the Absolute, and by means of which one can realize the truth about Prakriti and Purusha. The discipline of jnana and the discipline of bhakti, which is free from the influence of the three gunas, directed toward me, both lead to the same goal, which is signified by the word Bhagavan. Just as one and the same substance possessed of several attributes is perceived in different ways through the senses following different courses, in other words, that you can, if you look at something or if you taste it, you're going to perceive it in two different ways, but you're perceiving the same thing. Even so, the Lord, though one, is variously realized in various ways through different paths recommended by the scriptures. Through works of public utility, such as digging wells and tanks, constructing roads, etc., and sacrifices, charitable gifts, and austere penance, study of the Vedas, and an inquiry into their meaning, even through the control of the mind and senses, abstaining from prohibited acts, as well as through the renunciation of action, through yoga with different limbs, and likewise through the discipline of devotion, through bhakti yoga, through the twofold dharma, meaning dharma which is accomplished by worldly activity and dharma which is characterized by renunciation of worldly activity, and again through the realization of the true nature of the self, and through dispassion. Through all of these ways do we attain to the same self-effulgent Lord, who is both with attributes and without attributes, both saguna and nirguna. I have already told you the fourfold character of bhakti yoga in terms of tamasika, rajasika, sattvika, and nirguna bhakti yoga, as well as the nature of kala, whose movement cannot be perceived, and who brings about the birth and death, etc., of living beings. That's, of course, time. I have also described the various states of existence of the jiva, brought about by his actions, prompted by avidya, by ignorance, passing through which, O mother, the soul forgets his true nature. One should never teach this gospel of mine to a wicked person, defined as a source of annoyance to others, nor to him who is wanting in modesty, nor to an arrogant man, nor again to a moral rake, and in no case to a hypocrite. Nor should one impart it to a man thirsting after pleasures, nor to him who is attached to his home, nor again to him who is not my devotee, nor to those who hate my devotees. It may, no doubt, be imparted to a man full of reverence, a devotee, a meek soul, an uncavilling man, one who is friendly to living beings, and to him who takes delight in service, one who has developed a distaste for external objects, a man who is serene of mind, one who is free from jealousy, one who is pure both within and without, and above all, to him who holds me dearer than all. So, commentators on the Bhagavatam have wondered about this passage. Why would there be a reason to forbid telling this to ignorant people? Generally, the teaching is that the reason one should not teach it to them is not that, because obviously there's no secret knowledge in this. There's no like secret bija mantras or anything like that in this chapter. The point is you'd be wasting your time. Those are categories of people who would probably not even want to listen to you tell them this, and furthermore would make no use of it if they heard it. Whereas the second category of people, these people full of reverence, devotees, people who are unattached to the world and seeking knowledge, are the people who might benefit from it and who it would be worth telling this to. With his mind fixed on me, O mother, the man who reverently listens to or repeats this but once will surely attain to my state. Thus ends the 32nd discourse forming part of the story of Lord Kapila in Book 3 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And yeah, one more, and then we're going to have a perfect stopping point because we're going to finish Book 3. Discourse 33. Devahuti receives the light of wisdom and attains final beatitude. Maitreya resumed, since Maitreya is the narrator of this dialogue between Devahuti and Kapila. When Devahuti, the beloved spouse of the sage Kardama and mother of Lord Kapila, heard the foregoing discourse of the Lord, the veil of her ignorance was torn asunder. She bowed to him, the disseminator of the knowledge of Sankhya, which throws light on the fundamental principles, and extolled him thus. Devahuti said. Brahma, the birthless creator, saw only with his mental eyes your body, perceived by the 5 gross elements, the indriyas, the objects of senses in the mind, from which, from which proceeds the stream of the 3 gunas, nay, which is the seed of all, and lay manifest on the waters that had submerged the universe at the time of final dissolution, and from the lotus of whose navel Brahma himself had sprung. Though actionless, you are of unfailing resolve and possessed of countless inconceivable powers, and the ruler of all the jivas. That is why, having partitioned your energy according to the predominance of the 3 gunas, it is you who carry on the creation, preservation, and dissolution of the universe. How then could it be that you were born in my womb, you into whose belly the whole of this universe disappears at the time of universal dissolution? So that's in the Sanskrit there, the pun is kind of especially apparent. That's like, how could you fit in my belly when I was pregnant with you? She's saying, when you have the whole universe in your belly. And who at the end of a kalpa rest all alone on a leaf of a banyan tree in the form of an infant, possessing inconceivable powers and sucking its great toe. This is an image that refers to a whole other story. It's actually mostly told in Markandeya Purana, although I think it is told in the Bhagavatam in a short form, of a certain form of the Bala Krishna that exists even during the Mahapralaya, when nothing else is manifest. You assume a personality for the extermination of the sinful and the exaltation, O Lord, of those who abide by your commands. Just as you appear in the semblance of a boar and so on, even so this avatarana of yours is intended for showing the path leading to self-realization. By occasionally hearing and chanting your names, even just occasionally hearing and chanting your name is bowing to you, or even just remembering you, a pariah, here the word being translated as chandala, becomes worthy of adoration in this very life as a brahmana who has performed a soma yagna. So a chandala, this is a reference to the caste system. And chandala is someone who's not even in the 4 varnas, like a mlecha or below a shudra. Even a chandala becomes worthy as the highest of brahmanas, a soma yagni brahman, just by having remembered you, or even only occasionally hearing your names. There could be no doubt, then, about one's attaining the object of life by your sight. Oh, how wonderful that even a chandala becomes highly venerable only because he has your name on the tip of his tongue. Nay, they who utter your name have practiced austere penance, poured oblations into the sacred fire, bathed, conducted themselves well, and even recited the Vedas. That's sometimes interpreted as they must have done all those things for them to have the good karma of uttering your name. But it's also interpreted, and the context would kind of lend me to the second interpretation, that uttering your name is the equivalent of doing all of those things. In the form of Kapila, you are no other than that supreme reality, the highest person, who could be rightly conceived only in a mind that has been turned inward, and who brings to an end the stream of the 3 gunas by his own effulgence. You are Lord Vishnu himself, the source of the Vedas. I bow to you. Maitreya went on, thus praised, the Supreme Person bearing the name of Lord Kapila, who was full of filial affection, meaning affection for his parents, in this case for his mother, spoke to his mother in unfaltering accents. Lord Kapila said, by following the easy path pointed out by me, O mother, you will attain before long to the supreme goal. Have faith in this doctrine of mine, which has been followed even by the exponents of the Veda, so that you may attain to my birthless state. Those who are ignorant of this go through the process of death. Maitreya continued, having thus shown to his mother the noble way to self-realization, and permitted by her, who now declared that all was Brahman, Lord Kapila went his way. She too, so left the ashram and left her. She too applied herself to the practice of yoga according to the process of meditation taught by her son. In that hermitage, which stood like a diadem of flowers on the Sarasvati, since it was on an island in the Sarasvati River, and attained peace of mind. The curly locks she wore on her head, of her curly hair, turned brown on account of, from black to brown, on account of ablutions performed thrice a day, and became matted, while her body, which was clad in rags, grew emaciated as a result of severe penance. She renounced her incomparable house, which had been enriched by the austere penance and yogic power of the sage Kardama, a Prajapati, lord of created beings, and which was coveted even by the gods, by the devas, furnished as it was with beds of ivory, soft and white as the foam of milk and adorned with gold, and seats of gold provided with cushions exceedingly soft to the touch. In the walls of that house, which were made of transparent crystal and precious emerald, shone lights of jewels borne by beautiful statues of women. She also deserted the garden attached to her house, charming with its many blossoming celestial trees, cooing pairs of birds and humming bees drunk with honey. When she used to enter the pond in that garden, which was scented with the fragrance of lotuses, along with Kardama, who was bestowing his loving affection on her, that was her husband, Gandharvas and Kinnaras sang her praises. While leaving that garden, which was most eagerly sought after even by the spouses of Indra, Devahuti did wear a desolate look on her face, afflicted not by the caring about leaving that garden, but afflicted as she was at the separation from her son, who she knew she was never going to see again in that life. She had somehow consoled herself when her husband retired to the forest, but she felt very disconsolate, in spite of her having realized the truth, at the separation from her son, even as a cow, who is extremely fond of her calf, is grieved at the loss of her calf. Fixing her thought exclusively on her son, the divine Kapila, who was no other than Sri Hari, she soon grew indifferent, my son, Maitreya says to Vidura, even to such a house as she had just decided not to use anymore. She meditated on the form of the Lord, adorned with a cheerful countenance and spoken of by her son as worth meditating upon, fixing her thought on the same as a whole as well as in parts, in keeping with his specific teachings on that visualization meditation that we read last week. With a mind thoroughly depurated by the uninterrupted practice of devotion, most intense dispassion, and spiritual enlightenment leading to Brahmanhood, oneness with Brahman, and resulting from a due performance of one's duties, she then contemplated on her own self as projected everywhere, having set aside by the realization of its true nature the limitations imposed on it by the modes of Prakriti, meaning she meditated on how everything is herself, that herself is not limited to the body. Her mind being now settled in Brahman, the substratum of all the jivas, which is no other than the Lord, she no more thought of herself as a jiva, and was accordingly rid of all afflictions and attained final beatitude. Firmly established in perpetual samadhi, her misapprehension about the reality of the sense objects now disappeared, and she was no more conscious of her body than the man arisen from sleep remembers the body in a dream. Her body, though nourished by others, meaning by the Vidyadhara women, who were her caretakers, it's a type of celestial being, her body did not grow lean because there was no mental agony. So earlier it said that it did grow emaciated from tapas. So obviously it did grow somewhat lean, but it didn't grow. I think what it's saying here is because there was no mental agony, her body did not grow pained or stressed. It just grew naturally thin because she was eating very little and engaged in meditation all day. Though covered with layers of dirt, her body shone through it like a fire enveloped in smoke. Her mind being fully merged in Lord Vasudeva, she did not perceive her own body, which was completely given up to austerity and yoga and was being maintained by Providence, even when her hair fell loose and her clothes fell off from her body, rotting away. In this way, by following the path pointed out by Lord Kapila, she attained before long to the Lord, who is eternally free and is no other than the Supreme Spirit or Brahman, no other than Paramatman or Brahman. The most sacred spot where she attained final beatitude, a valley in Vidura, was known all over the three worlds by the name of Siddhapada, meaning a place where literally Siddha foot, but meaning where the feet of a Siddha herself touched. Her mortal frame, which had been purged through yoga of all its dross, was transformed into a river, which ranks foremost among all streams, O gentle Vidura, confers the highest blessings and is resorted to by Siddhas. So merged into the river where she was sitting. Having taken leave of his mother, Lord Kapila, the great yogi, proceeded towards the northeast from that hermitage of his father. Duly worshipped and offered an abode by ocean himself, by Samudra Deva, a form of Varuna Deva. He continues there even to this day, in perfect peace of mind, absorbed in deep meditation for the good of all the three worlds, and is being extolled by siddhas, charanas, gandharvas, and sages, as well as by hosts of apsaras, and praised by the teachers of Sankhya, Asuri, and others, who are his disciples, and he started the Sankhya lineage. I have thus narrated to you, dear and sinless Vidura, what you asked me, the holy dialogue between Lord Kapila and Devahuti, his mother. He who listens to and he who expounds this teaching of the sage Kapila, which is the most secret of all the doctrines teaching the ways and means of God realization, is able to fix his mind on Lord Vishnu, who bears on his banner an emblem of Garuda, the king of the birds, and attains to the Lord's feet. Thus ends the 33rd discourse, forming part of the story of Lord Kapila, forming the end of the story of Lord Kapila, in Book 3 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita, composed by the sage Veda Vyasa and consisting of 18,000 shlokas. And that is the end of Book 3. And I think that's a perfect end for us today. Next time we can start with the 4th skandha.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. I know that this one was kind of intense in the first part with some very intense descriptions of the possible sufferings of samsara, but it kind of ended on a lighter note.
Thank you, Devala. Thank you, Radha. Everyone. Jai Shri Krishna.
Jai Shri Krishna.
If anyone has any questions or comments, they can say or speak.
Yeah, Sunil, chapter 31. There's a few other passages like this, but in all the Shastras, that's pretty much as dark as it ever gets, I would say. Chapter 31 of this one. There's in Garuda Purana and some other Puranas, it says basically the same thing, where it really gets into the really kind of hammering on the depths of misery that are possible in samsara as a way of warning you that going on with attachment to samsara is dangerous. Like, even apart from the fact that you're kind of not accessing the limitless anandam of Brahman, which you could have, you are at risk of falling into extreme suffering if you remain attached to this world.
Right. So Devala, this reminds me of the time Radha's father passed away. We had to read the Garuda Puran.
Right.
And the Garuda Puran was very dark.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Not the whole thing, but there are chapters in the Garuda Purana which go into even more detail than we did here, into the different Naraka lokas and stuff.
Right. It talks about the different lokas that a dead person has to transfer to.
Yeah.
And it takes time to go through hell, and it describes hell in very much a lot of details.
Yeah, I've read it too. I know. Yeah, even in the Bhagavatam, we touched on it here. In Book 5, there's a chapter on the Narakas that goes into more not as much as in Garuda Purana, but a little bit more detail than we did here. Yeah, it's Naraka is kind of an interesting thing. There's nothing in Sanatana Dharma is like the eternal damnation or eternal hell of Christianity or Islam, but it's your whatever experiences you cause to others, you cause to yourself through the wheel of karma. And if a bunch of suffering resulted from your actions, then you're going to go through that suffering yourself. And narakas are a way to burn it off quickly, or perhaps not so quickly, but faster than if you diffused it over a long period of time through life in this loka. You can go through. Yeah, I can end the recording here.
Jai Shri